Thanks.
Yeah,
Didn't say it this time. Last time it said you're being recorded.
it said it on my end.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, good. At least you know. Thanks.
I've okayed it. So Conrad is a Class B school. I'm a 712 principal here. We try to have basically two schools in one building. And what I mean by that is we want to have our 7-8 have their own identity, have their own part of the building, but it's extremely hard because, as I said earlier, I have 22 certified staff and probably 12 of them are shared. And so it's really hard to create a culture where this junior high feels like a junior high and the high school is their own entity. So it's trying to walk that fine line of allowing the junior high kids to stay junior high and innocent, if that makes sense, because high schoolers definitely make them grow up a lot faster than what I would like it to happen. When I took over here, I got hired really late. It was actually August 1st when I got offered the job. There was some turmoil going on in Conrad, and some administrators were forced out. And because of that, they wanted a change. And like I said, I've hired 14 people in the last 22, or 14 of the 22 in the last 2 years. Multiple reasons. A couple of them I have had to non-tenure, but the vast majority are teachers that were leaving because of what was going on here. And so it's been a challenging 3 years, but it's been really, really rewarding, and we're on pace now to keep all of our teachers. And the state, I don't know if you guys have looked, but at the state report card came out for all the schools. And in our area, we were the only schools that showed growth through the pandemic, where all the other schools declined. At least in this area. I didn't look for across the state, but it made us feel pretty good that we're on the right track. And it also tells you where we were at. We were a targeted school from OPI standards for like 5 years running.
Congratulations. You should be very proud of that, Raymond.
Well, thanks. I didn't have a whole lot to do with it. So if I look at George's fourth slide, which is where I want to, or I don't know which one it is. Second slide, I guess, introduce myself, challenges as a principal and assets in your district. The biggest asset to any district is the teachers. I don't care what the curriculum is. I don't care what your philosophy and education is. Who is going to have the greatest impact is the teachers. My view as a principal is there's a reason we've hired you guys, is you're supposed to be the experts in your field. And I want to empower my teachers to take ownership of their classroom. And so we give, here in Conrad, we give teachers a lot of flexibility and to make their classroom theirs, and a lot of saying what goes on. There's very few expectations that I have on them, other than to be professionals and to teach what they're supposed to teach. One of those expectations is how we grade, which is, I think, why Georgia asked me to speak. I don't know why, I'm still pondering, but we are implementing standards-based grading. We are 100% summative based at the current moment. I'm assuming all of you understand that language. If you don't, please interrupt me. Yes, Georgia.
You want to have it explained? Yeah, a couple people do want to have it explained, because, and then say how that you were grading it before. Was it all just testing, as there were no standards at all?
Okay, so most schools, which you guys are probably accustomed to, in all honesty, is you break your grading down into points. And it can be anything from what I've seen is participation. If kids bring their supplies to class, they get X amount of points every day, behavior points per week. So some teachers will say, okay, you get 10 points a week for behavior. And if there's issues, we're going to start taking points away. And they use it as a behavior management tool. Well, that all is going into the grade book. And then they decide, okay, this test is worth X amount of points and this writing assignment's worth this amount of points. This homework assignment's worth so many points. But what ends up happening is you as the teacher are dictating what a student's grade is. And so if you're teaching the exact same subject, because let's say you're at CS Porter and you're the math teacher, there's another 8th grade or 7th grade math teacher there and you're teaching the same subject. Well, if you're assigning all these points for these non-educational measures, you're either inflating the student's grade and you're supporting them because they're a good student, right? They show up on time, they do their work, they don't ever get in trouble. They have mom or dad at home to check their homework and make sure it's all done. So on all these assignments or all these other things, you're marking them at 100%, but come test time, they bomb. And let's say they get a 50, they could be passing your class with a B, where a kid who is maybe a behavior issue, maybe he or she is the mom and dad at home and cooks dinner and takes care of little brother and sister. So they're never able to do the 50 homework problems you assign every night. And so they get zeros on all those, but guess what? They ace every single test. They could be failing your class. And so our job as educators, when you boil it all down and you peel away all the layers that we ask you as teachers to now play, you're a mental health therapist, you're a parent, you're a guardian, you're a counselor, on top of being a teacher. Well, your true job is to teach the standards. And so by moving to standards-based, what we are able to do is identify, has the student taught the standards you are supposed to be teaching? All that other stuff is important to reach mastery level or proficiency at those standards, but a behavior issue shouldn't keep a kid from passing your class. Not doing their homework shouldn't keep a kid from passing your class. Now, if they do the practice, is there a correlation to them passing the summative? Most of the time, yes. My analogy I always use is sports or a music recital is, if you're going to go up and play a piano solo in front of 1,000 people, are you going to spend hours practicing and preparing yourself, or are you going to show up like I did, not prepared, and just wing it, right? And so if someone shows up unprepared, are they going to perform well? There is the small percentage of your kids that will be able to do that, and they shouldn't get knocked, but most of the time your kids are going to have to put in the work to be able to pass the summatives. So what are summatives? Summatives are anything that is assessing what students have learned. That can be a written test that you are used to, traditional. If you're a math or science or English person, it could be a paper in history or English. Science, a lot of teachers want to make lab summative, and I would argue that the vast majority of them are formative. So formative assessments are tools we use to help the students understand or learn. So if that lab is inquiry based, it should be formative because you're using it to help lead or scaffold them to a new understanding. But if you're using it to see if they can dilute a acidic solution correctly, then that would be summative because you've taught it. So summative assessments are anything that you're using to gauge a student's understanding. It could be a conversation that you have with them. I'm a former math teacher, and one of the big things I always hear about is my kid doesn't test well. Well, they get test anxiety. That is true in some cases. And what I would do is I'd pull kids in and have them do work on the whiteboard. So they're standing and I might be helping someone at my desk and I'm giving out problems and they're working on their own on the whiteboard and they think they're just practicing. And if I can see that they can do everything I want them to do on the summative and they're able to do it on the whiteboard, I'm going to give them credit because they just proved to me they can do it. Does that make sense? I mean, summatives are anything. In English, it could be a conversation. We sit down and start talking about a concept. And if they're able to explain it to me, I'll give them that check mark or that assessment that they've passed. I am 100% against points, because let's go back to the math analogy. If I am giving an assessment or a test and it's 10 points, and I just look at the final answer and mark it right or wrong, and they get every single question wrong, they have a 0 out of 10, right? But the next math teacher says, well, there's 5 steps per question. And so they're going to get 5 points. So it's a total of 50, and they do everything right, except for they hit multiply button instead of add at the last step. So now they get what? 40 out of 50 points. So now they get an 80 in your class, but they failed my class for the exact same test. Points are arbitrary, and I would urge and argue all of you to never use points in your classroom. And so that's where standards-based grading comes in. You're now looking at, has a student mastered, are they proficient, or are they developing their skills? And by doing this, we are better able to answer. Sorry, I've got someone outside my office spinning Brodies. And it's distracting me.
Break. If you need to attend to it, go.
Anyways, by looking at this, we can better judge, is this student a mastery student? And so the explanation to here is, so if I'm going to give directions from my office in Conrad, Montana to Georgia's classroom there at I'm going to give you the route, where to turn, the exit to take at Van Buren, how to park at campus, what building to go into, and the classroom number, right? That would be mastery. I can give someone this and they're going to be able to walk through it and do it 100%. A proficient student knows that they've got to take Highway 200 from Bowman's Corner down to Bonner, get on the interstate, turn off of Van Buren, find the School of Ed, and find Georgia, right? Like, they have a general idea, they could get someone there, but I'm gonna have to put in some work. A level 2 or a novice student might send me to Great Falls, to Bozeman, and then to Missoula. Like, in a roundabout way, they kind of know where they're starting and where they're ending, but somewhere along the process, they screw up. So if you start looking at it that way, you as a teacher are much more consistent with how you're assessing your students. And that leads us back to points. If, like, right now, I have an English teacher who likes to give out 200-point essays. Okay, if you do the math, at our grading scale at Conrad, we're a 10-point grading scale. So a 79 is a C and an 80 is a B. If I hand you an essay that's worth 200 points, can you, as an English teacher or my English teacher, tell me the difference between a 79 and an 80? It's 1 point. There is somewhere in there that 1 point switches it from a 79 to a 79.5, right? Which we round up. So this kid gets a C, this kid gets a B, because off of a 200-point assignment, you say this kid earned 1 more point. I would be hard pressed to say any of us can decide where that 1 point's at. And so that's the general gist of why I am implementing standards-based grading. From a practical standpoint in your classroom, your kids benefit hugely from it, and you as an educator benefit from it. You are better able to plan and identify what kids you need to help and who's ready for more. It allows me as a teacher to look back and say, okay, did I screw up because I thought I had the world's greatest lesson over the last 5 days, and I give them the summative, and it turns out none of them are able to do it. Well, a lot of teachers will sit and say, the kids just didn't work hard enough, they didn't do their homework. Well, no, that's a reflection of me as a teacher. If I have 20 kids in my class and 18 of them failed it, it's not the kids that failed, it's me as an educator that failed, right? So I've got to reassess what I've done and take it from a different angle. Or in some cases, as a math teacher, I just walk away and say, I'm going to teach something else for a little bit and come back to it. I always started at 8th grade with systems of equations, and Georgia, being a math teacher, might look at me and say, what in the heck are you doing? They haven't even learned linear equations. And that's true, but I always wanted to show them what was the most difficult thing I was going to ask them to do in 8th grade and then work backwards. So now they understand why I'm teaching everything that I am. And so they have buy-in.
Okay, so my question to you is, your explanation of standards-based is good. So you're having all your teachers, somehow you convinced all your teachers to go there. So at the 7-12 level, somehow you sold them on it. So do they have their standards and say proficient, novice, or whatever they're using that on their grades as well?
Okay, so yeah, I had to sell it. As a principal, you become a middle manager and a salesman a lot of the time. You as the teachers are the greatest asset, but my job is to make sure you guys are headed in the right direction and you're selling the right product. And so I was lucky coming to Conrad in the fact that they were ready for change. Okay. Because of where things had been the previous 4 years, they were open-minded. When I got here, I had a 7-12 building that didn't have a class schedule. Teachers were
No willy-nilly, there was no bell.
There was no bell. There was no first period, second period. Yeah, I see you're making faces. That's the environment of why my teachers were leaving. Okay. And so just by being a different face and a different name, I already had equity. So I was lucky in that regard. Year one, what we did, or what I did, is we spent every single PIR and professional development day in our standards. And we did it 7-12, and I even requested my 6th and 5th grade teachers from our other building to come up and work with us. And we got vertically aligned. Ended up rearranging a lot of our classes and identifying what are those essential standards at each grade level, what are the things that I guarantee. So the first thing I did is I had every single teacher tell me what they had to have kids come into their classroom knowing. So what were their must-haves? Okay. Those must-haves needed to line up with the grade level before them guarantees. So if I'm a 8th grade math teacher, I'm going to have these guarantees that need to line up with Algebra 1's must-haves, right? And so now I'm guaranteeing what they must have. And so we spent months in our standards just getting to know them. Believe it or not, there's a lot of teachers out there that don't even know Montana state standards exist or what they are. And so,
Well, don't you all know? They all know. They're shaking their head, and IEFA as well. So we're good on that regard.
good. You're doing your job, Georgia.
Thanks.
And so that's what we did. We spent an entire year just vertically aligning, identifying our must-haves and our guarantees. And in all honesty, there's a lot of standards out there that you're not going to get to if you're teaching certain content subjects. And then like my art and my band and my Spanish teacher were like, okay, what good does this do me? Well, we were able to develop an entire plan for them because they have kids the whole time they're in the 7-12 here, and what it looks like from junior high Spanish all the way through Spanish 4 as a senior, and what it looks like and how they as a teacher can progress and dive deeper into those standards. Because if I remember right, Spanish has 8 standards. That's it. And they're very basic. And so I gave my Spanish teacher the leeway and say, okay, how do we go deeper and make this more enrichment for our Spanish 4 students? So that was year one. Year two was a whole lot of writing student-based learning targets. And I think that is the hardest part of anything. The standards are given to us, writing assessments are easy. Writing those student-based learning targets, or I don't know, maybe the I can statements, that is the hardest thing in my opinion for a teacher to do, because you'll write them and then you'll go to write an assessment and realize that your learning target has nothing to do with what you're actually assessing. And so the little verb that you put in those I can statements are huge. Because if you say I can identify, that's a heck of a lot different than I can justify or I can synthesize. I had a lot of teachers that were saying ID, and they're given these short answer response questions. I'm like, well, you're not even asking what you're telling your kids to do. So lining those up with your standards are hugely important, because now it tells you what you're assessing. It gives you a roadmap of where you need to start with them. And it helps the kids understand what is important. What are you actually expecting me to get out of your 48-minute ramble session? And as a teacher, always start with the end in mind. Like, where do you want your kids to end up? I don't care if it's a month-long assessment or lesson, or if it's 3 days. Where do you eventually want them to end up? You being the professional, you know where you want them to be. Depending on where they're at, might take you a lot longer. And so I don't know if UM is still making you do it, but the old school lesson plans that you plan out a week at a time or 2 weeks at a time, I'm going to tell you is pointless. And I hope I don't get in trouble with Georgia. But
We just do day lessons, what are you going to teach tomorrow? That's it.
all right, that's where you need to be. What I get from my kids today is going to drive 100% of what I do tomorrow. If I am able to get through everything and my kids can show me in their exit ticket that they're ready for more, we're moving on. If I spend all 48 minutes and I'm banging my head against the wall, guess what we're going to do tomorrow? We're going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to approach it from a different way and try and communicate it in a way that they'll pick it up. And a lot of times, if you can find that one kid that does understand what you're talking about, and you empower them to put it in whatever language these teenage kids speak, they can teach it a lot better than you can. And you've got to be able to say, you know what, you go ahead and do it, and I'll just be the bumpers on the little kid bowling lanes that just helps the ball get down to where it's supposed to be.
So you got the teachers in year 2, they got the end in mind, and they had a roadmap. So then what did you do in year 3?
So that's where we're at right now, Georgia. We're in year 3. Year 3, we have been writing assessments. So we actually will not start standards-based grading actually in the classroom with the kids until year 4. Because it will fall flat on its face if you don't have the assessments aligned to the learning targets. And so we have spent every single PIR, professional development, this year writing assessments. And teachers are scared to share. I've noticed that 2 things happen. They either feel like you're attacking them, or they're putting themselves out there to be judged, or they think you're going to steal their great idea. And so trying to communicate with them of saying, we're here for the betterment of our students. And so like my building, I have 1 junior high math teacher and 2 high school math teachers. English, I've got 1 7-8 teacher, 1 9-10, 1 11-12. And so they have to work together, because if they don't, they're on an island by themselves. And so what we do is my 7-8 teacher will build an assessment for these learning targets, take it to the 9, 10, 11, 12 teacher and say, here's my learning target. Here's the assessment. Does it align? And is it assessing what I really want them to do? And so they take it and they get together and they talk about it and share ideas on how it can change or if it's ready to go. The next step is then now giving those assessments to the kids and seeing if they actually answer it the way you expect them to. Because a lot of times those kids will read things and they'll give you a completely different answer than what you're expecting. And if that's the case, you've got to be willing to say, okay, they answered it correctly, but that's not what I was expecting. So how do you go back and change or put different parameters to get what you wanted out of them?
So in a lot of ways, this is your pilot year. You're kind of testing the waters.
Yeah, I would say that we're still in the process of even developing it. we're
Sure.
testing our assessments to see if they're going to work, but we haven't made, I mean, my teachers are still point-based because when we implement this, it has to work. And if it blows up in their face, I've just lost all credibility, and it won't fail. I promise it won't fail.
Hell or high water, it won't fail. Okay.
It won't fail. I'm too stubborn.
How many students did you say are in your your 712?
712, I have about 220 this year. We'll have about 240 next year.
Okay.
So when all my teachers left, so did my students. So I've graduated the smallest class 3 years running at this high school in the entire district. So my numbers are going up because kids aren't leaving for other schools.
That's interesting. But what are the schools they go to?
It's the surrounding areas. They ride their horses, you know, in their covered wagons to the next town over.
Smart Alec.
No, there's other schools nearby. I mean, they've got to travel, but Conrad's a rural farming community, so they might be 30 miles from Conrad as is, and it might be 30 miles the other direction to a different town.
So you've got a really good idea in mind of how this might progress. And how tough was it for you to get your bell schedule set up?
That was day one before any teacher even showed up my first year.
You just said, here it is, and that's it?
Yep, I just pulled the principal card and said, this is what we're doing. My teachers were extremely happy. I fought kids for about 6 months on actually having to go to class. So that was more challenging than the teachers. The teachers were all for the bell schedule.
I think so, yeah. That just seemed, I don't want to know how that even started, but so anything else about standard-based? I think you've kind of covered it all, sounds to me, unless you've got some other profound statements.
I have no profound statements other than I would say I would embrace it because this is the way education is going. And I firmly believe this is best practice. Our education system hasn't changed since George Washington was a little boy, and it needs to change, and the way we assess and the way we grade needs to change. The system set in place was designed to weed out and choose talent opposed to develop talent. And in today's world, we need to develop every student that we can. So
I like that, develop talent. That's a good one. Anybody have questions for the high school principal?
How are you going to know that this is working?
how are we gonna know? So I hate to say this because I am anti standardized testing, but our test scores will improve. So we MAPS test, we obviously do SBAC and ACT testing. As a school teacher, when I was actually teaching my 8th grade students, my average implementing it this way was 250 their spring testing as 8th graders, which is right around where we expect sophomores to be. And so that's how you justify it, is you look at standardized assessments and say, look at how well our kids are doing. And I said that at the beginning, is it doesn't really matter what philosophy if you have good educators. My argument though is you as a teacher should not be the one yielding the power of assigning points, and this gets away from that.
Why not just tell your teachers their job is to raise everyone's standardized test scores, not bother with standards and changing point systems and whatever? Sounds like that's the only metric you're judging by.
Okay, the only metric that I'm judging by is standards. So I would like to see you grade a test and then I'll grade a test, and we'll see how much of a difference there is, and then ask Georgia to grade a test. And what ends up happening is you and I and Georgia will all look at it different. And so it's not about test scores, it's about actually identifying what the kids have learned or haven't learned.
I'm sorry, I may not ask my question very well. I just meant, why not tell your teachers your job is to raise those SBAC or MAPS test or ACT scores? You know, that's their job. That's how they're
that isn't their job. I'm not going to tie my school or my teacher's job to those standardized tests. That's not what education is. I think there's a lot of proof out there that an ACT score doesn't indicate a whole lot other than can a kid take a test. How do we measure it? Is it working as if those scores improve? I don't know if I'm answering your question, and you can call me out on it and ask me to change my answer. That's fine. But the prerogative of saying just raise the test scores, now you're teaching to a standardized test, and that's not what we want. We want to make sure our students are actually learning those standards that the state says we need to teach. By going standards based, I can identify, have you learned how to solve variable equations? Have you learned how to solve linear equations? Have you learned how to solve systems of equations? Where if you just stick a B on a report card, I don't know what you know and what you don't know. And so now when I send you to Algebra 1, if you can't solve systems of equations, you're going to fall flat on your face at the beginning of the year because you did all the work up to that to get to a B. And so it allows you as a teacher going into the next grade to look and say, okay, this is where the kid is excelling and does well, and this is where his holes are. So now I can look and start filling those gaps to improve the student's learning.
Yeah, and I like that because then you know what that, if the student can do linear equations, do systems of equations, that's more skills-based, standards-based, whatever you want to call it. So you know what that student knows. Maybe they don't have fluency down, but they have other things, critical thinking, that's down. And
so there is this idea that you do a soft report card, and those are all those other skills, and you send home a report card with those other skills, almost like the elementary level. But if you get like I get transfer kids in now, since COVID has hit, our school took in over 20 students in the 712 from out of state in the last year. And when you get a transcript from a kid and you see that they got a C in Algebra 1 or an F in this class or a B in this class, we don't know what was taught. We don't know what they failed at or what they did well at. And so now when I pull them into my class, how do I figure out what their needs are? And that's the biggest thing, is it helps us identify what the kid needs. Because if a kid's moving from my class to your classroom and I teach systems of equations at the beginning of the year and they transfer at semester and you're going to teach systems of equations, so they spent an entire year doing systems of equations but never got variable equations.
Yeah, so I like your approach to having the standards base and getting the teachers thinking that way. So I want to do a site visit. Gwen's got a question.
I think mine is similar to Josh's in that, like, if you're going from standards-based grading to standardized testing, which is points grade, is that what you were getting at? Like,
No,
I guess I don't get how they're measuring the same thing, or is it just like that's standardized testing is the only way you have to gauge change?
I think out of standardized, you guys just remove standardized testing from your brain altogether. That's the ACTs and the SBAC. From an honest opinion, this is personal opinion, those mean jack. They're how the state assesses us as schools. That to me means absolutely nothing. If we are doing our job, our kids will perform just fine on those things.
But can you see how it's hard to reconcile that with you saying that the only way you're going to measure whether standards-based grading is actually being effective is whether those standardized test scores go up?
That is the most clear answer to see that, because a lot of those standardized tests are written to the state standards. So yeah, I get that, but my counter to you is if a kid comes in and an A or a B or a C, you have no idea what that means.
I'm not disputing that.
What's that?
I said I'm not disputing. I agree with that completely. Like that's not,
okay.
Yeah.
How do we know if it's working? We won't know until later on. There is not a clear-cut answer, because what happens is we won't know that till 2-3 years down the road, when this 8th grade class is now juniors and seniors and how they're performing at that level. And any decision you make, the greatest thing in education is consistency. Is you have to have high valuable teachers in your building for an extended period of time before you can make any real change. And when you have turnover at a considerable rate, and when you don't really know what you're assessing, it's hard to identify where you can improve. By going standards-based, we can identify where our kids need to improve, whether that's in the reading comprehension, it makes a big difference if I can identify that my 8th grader doesn't know what negative numbers are. If I give them a test or an assessment and I can identify this is the skill they're lacking, and I can spend 2 to 3 days to fix it and never have to worry about it again, they're much better off for it than if I just continue to push through and say, well, they don't really get it, and I never fill that gap. And now they get to a point in high school, they're barely getting by, they get D- or Ds, and I've never filled that gap of understanding they didn't know. Now they don't take any of those upper level classes that we are hoping that our kids take.
Yeah, so I get what you're doing. So you're gonna keep implement the assessments that your teachers are developing. And then, as you're saying, your incoming 7th to 8th grade, when they get to the junior or senior level, you'll see if your ACT scores improved or not. And that will be a indicator. I don't
It's
think
a byproduct, yes.
right. So I don't think it's the ultimate. I think you did phrase it was your ultimate. I think that's what we're kind of questioning.
Okay, no, sorry, that's not what I meant, but that's one of the clearest ways as far as what the outside community is going to see is that's how we get judged, is through that.
Well, I'll come up in 3 years and I'll interview your students and see where they are.
That sounds great with me. I've got nothing to hide, Georgia.
Okay, any other questions anybody have? I know it's
All right.
time. Go
Good
ahead.
luck.
Well, hey, thank you for your time and your thoughts. And I do need to get up there to Conrad and say hi to Jennifer for me.
I will. Thanks, Georgia. Bye.
Take care.
Thanks for being here.
Bye.